Hey, it's Eric Newcomer. Welcome to the Cerebral Valley podcast. I'm here with my good friends and Cerebral Valley co-host, Max Child.
Hello, hello.
And James Wilsterman.
What's up, Eric? Glad to be here.
And we're going to talk about the miserable, happy, terrifying topic, the thing on everybody's mind, the election. We're going to try and focus a little on AI policy, but also just Silicon Valley's strong influence on the incoming Trump administration. James, how are you feeling right now?
Well, I do feel like a bit of deja vu from 2016, and I would say I don't feel like shocked by the outcome in the same way. You know, I do feel like we're just gonna go back on that roller coaster of Trump being so.
We're resistance libs now. We're all getting our sort of pink hats on, or
I don't think we'll be. I don't think the world will look like that. At least not in the immediate days of the Trump administration. But who knows what could happen?
Right, Max.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had the same conversation like 8 times yesterday, which is everyone's like, I'm pretty upset. I'm also not surprised. I'm way less surprised than I was 8 years ago. And to the resistance lib point, I think everyone's kind of like, you know, I'm tired of this crap and we're going to have to fight and slog our way through the next 4 years. But I also don't think it's going to go quite as, cuckoo pink hat direction as you were referencing.
Well, I think there are a couple things, and I wrote a big piece, but, one, that Trump actually won the majority makes a little bit more, and that the majority voted for him really knowing what he's about. So it's like, man, this is what they wanted, so I do think, none of us, I didn't vote for Trump. None of us voted for Trump. This is coastal elite crowd right here. But this is what America wanted.
The point I would make is just that, again, Kamala's going to probably run about 4 or 5 points behind Biden or something. That means 1 in 50 people switch sides, right? So if you imagine you're in a restaurant with 50 people, just one of them that voted for Biden last time switched over to Trump, right? And
except in every single county.
Except in every single state and every single district. So you could say, the uniformity of that 1 in 50 switching is surprising to me.
Surprising.
But if you look around a restaurant and you're like, I can see 1 to 2 people in here switching sides, it's not that shocking. And I guess it's maybe surprising that it happened everywhere.
After they saw a train wreck, that's what's surprising. It's like, put that conductor back in there. Like,
but the data shows that people think the country is a train wreck right now, right? We all are like, January 6th was a legendary train wreck, but the data shows more people think the country is a train wreck right now than like ever before. And whether or not you think that's right or wrong, that's how people are feeling. So 1 in 50 or 2 in 50 switching is just not that surprising. And I think everyone I talked to yesterday had that.
And the prediction markets were right. I believe in the prediction markets, but I feel like the whale really made me skeptical.
You were skeptical that whale was driving a lot of that shift towards Trump.
I believe. I was skeptical on the results. Now I'm like, oh, he's smart. Well, it turned out there was a story that he had paid a pollster to run polls. There's this strategy where you say, what does your neighbor believe? And that sort of reveals things that people otherwise might try to hide, and that his sort of neighbor polling showed people even more supportive of Trump. And so it wasn't, this guy was putting, many millions of dollars to work on this bet. It makes sense that he did his research.
Yeah, it's not clear to me that his 30 million or whatever was actually driving the prediction markets on Polymarket. Like, the liquidity is pretty high. I think a lot of people were betting on Trump. So I do wonder how much it was intelligent, analysis versus like the crypto industry leans sort of towards Republicans.
Anyway, there are endless takes to be out on Trump. I'm sure you're going to, the pod bros, or I don't know, Matt Iglesias coming to us for our tech. So we will now dig into what this means for AI policy.
And tech policy in general.
Yeah.
I wanted to frame this up. I think, we talked a little bit earlier about where we think the Trump administration can have a big impact on tech and AI specifically, and kind of laid out 5 key areas that I think would be good to walk through. And obviously, if you guys feel like I'm missing anything, we'll throw it in there. But I think the big ones are energy policy. So, nuclear, solar. How are we going to, generate enough energy to power all these advancements in foundational models and so on? I think chips is a huge one. CPUs, GPUs, NVIDIA, Taiwan, TSMC in Arizona, all that kind of stuff. Regulation, as we discussed recently, the California state bill that was meant to regulate really large AI models was vetoed by Governor Newsom, but maybe there will be a national regulation, maybe there won't. Where do we think Trump leans there? Markets and M&A is a huge one. The mergers and acquisitions, the roll-ups of small tech companies have been severely depressed under the Biden administration. Lena Khan, his Federal Trade Commission chair, is sort of openly anti-tech and anti-acquisition. Will that change under Trump? And then finally, I think you just can't leave out the old chaos, black swan madness of the Trump administration. Wild shit seemed to happen on a weekly basis, January 6th being the real cherry on top of that Sunday. But what kind of crazy stuff could happen, and how does that affect, tech and AI? Obviously, hopefully not crazy enough to lead to, bigger negative consequences. But I think
say nuclear.
Well, nuclear or just Cold War, right. Cold War II,
maybe like a pandemic or something.
Yeah, like a crazy global pandemic. Yeah, I think that was a good black swan. Not Trump's fault, though. I think we can agree. Maybe let's talk energy. How do we make enough energy to power GPT-8 or whatever's going to come in the next 4 years? Again, I think to frame this up, we're already seeing a loosening in nuclear policy and regulation. Texas is building more solar panels than the rest of the country because it's easier to build there. How are we going to make enough energy? And is Trump good for energy or not?
Well, I will say that the bid to use nuclear to power that Amazon data center was rejected by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission under Biden. So I think we'll see what happens, but I could definitely see Trump administration being pro-nuclear and reversing some of these decisions to reject efforts by big tech to use nuclear power, restart these nuclear reactors.
Hopefully, I think more likely than not he's friendlier to nuclear, but I don't think we know for sure.
I mean, I think nuclear is a tough one because everyone's afraid of meltdowns, Chernobyl, yada, yada, yada. Even though I think you can objectively say nuclear hasn't killed that many people. Nuclear energy, for the record, not nuclear weapons.
Right.
It's just very scary to people. It's just got this fundamentally scary element to it.
I think populist. It's not a populist.
Yeah, it's not a populist energy source, and Trump is nothing if not very sensitive to populism. I think solar is the much more interesting one. I just keep seeing more and more data about how much cheaper solar's gotten in the last couple decades. It's now basically cheaper than any new source of energy.
And Texas is rocking solar, right?
Exactly,
I mean, it is like just deregulate, don't tell people what to do with their houses, and you'll get a lot of solar.
Yeah,
and so
Texas solar is really the argument that, a deregulatory environment is perhaps better for the climate than people who vibe more with climate change being an issue. Like, Texas is probably the most impactful state in the union in terms of progressing our clean energy future, because you can just throw up solar panels in like a couple months there. And you can't do that anywhere else in America, certainly not California. And so arguably Texas is having a more positive impact on America's transition into clean energy than any other, major state government, or than the federal government, certainly.
I hate that the first one is pro-Trump. That's our bias. I showed it right there. I mean, one thing, I do think it's not surprising that on the measurement of unrestrained energy production without much regard for environmental impact, who's going to win? Any generic Republican, I think, is sort of a traditional answer there.
I mean, I think to your point, we can caveat all of this with Trump changes his mind all the time. He did Operation Warp Speed, and now he basically wants to ban vaccines. So, no guarantees that their stated situation is where we'll end up with solar panels. But I think trying to be a little optimistic in the midst of the sort of darkness of this experience, that maybe this will be really good for clean energy in the United States.
And obviously, there's also just the risk of like favoritism, where it's like Amazon maybe never gets their nuclear contract approved, but Elon gets 3 of them. So that'll be another issue.
Totally in play.
Chips. This should be a winning issue for Biden. He passed legislation called the CHIPS Act. Could not be more overtly aggressive on this issue, trying to make sure that, America is not dependent on China, really, to produce chips that power, all our devices. Of course, today, Taiwan, which at the end of the Biden administration is not China, is, through TSMC, a major producer of silicon for the United States. I don't know. What do you think? Is Trump a gain or loss on the chips front, James?
Trump in the last few months of the campaign was saying on the trail that the CHIPS Act was so bad that the only way to get these companies, or the best way to get these companies back to manufacturing in America, is to put a bunch of tariffs on their imports, so they're forced back to America. So I'm a little skeptical that he's going to be sticking with the Biden strategy here, even though it seems to be succeeding in the U.S. But I could see him changing his mind too once kind of the clarity of the issue is in front of him.
Yeah, I think like solar, energy in general, where we were sort of like, yeah, based on what they're saying, this policy could be pretty good for energy production. I think we have to go based on what they're saying, to James's point, and it's not good. Like, they hate the CHIPS Act. Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, said they're going to try to repeal it, even though his co-speaker at an event was like, actually, that was really good for my district, and I'm a Republican, so can we not do that?
So bizarre. It's industrial policy. Like, I don't understand.
Tariffs are a terrible way to deal with this problem. I mean, I fundamentally, we'll get this in the Black Swan section, but I think that Trump makes it much more likely that China will try to take over Taiwan in the next 4 years, which would be the worst possible thing for chips on a global scale. Obviously,
the reason we need to bring semiconductor production here is because of the fear that we don't have access to Taiwan. As long as we do, we're in a pretty good spot.
It's obviously up for debate, but I pretty strongly believe that Trump is enabling China and Russia, but let's just focus on China right now. And there's sort of leaders to act in a more dictatorial fashion. And clearly the number one thing Xi Jinping wants to do is retake Taiwan.
They have like US a date set, right? Haven't they said like 2026 or something?
They're doing like practice blockades in the ocean around the island. They're like, we're just going to throw like 9 battleships in a little circle around Taiwan just to feel out the waters. So it's not looking good in my opinion. I don't know. I'm pretty pessimistic about the future of the Taiwan-China conflict.
All right, we're moving on to regulation. I think it's pretty obvious that the VCs and Elons of the world who helped get Trump elected believe that Trump just won't regulate. That what is Doge, Department of Government Efficiency? Yeah, exactly. We're going to cut everything. Why would we add any regulation to get in the way of AI?
Let it rip, baby.
We should talk about what is Elon trying to achieve from a regulatory perspective, because he was supportive of SB 1047, the California bill that Governor Newsom vetoed this year. So I am a little confused. Maybe you guys have a better sense of what Elon prefers from a regulatory perspective.
He prefers he be the one to do it, and everyone else be regulated. Is my
checks out. Didn't he suggest that SpaceX executives be part of the Pentagon?
Yeah.
I think that was a story that came out today. It seems like what's good for Elon is apparently good for America.
But yeah, I mean, Elon is extremely worried about sort of, the big existential risks of AI. That's why he helped create OpenAI in the first place. Now OpenAI is another source of worry for him. So he's been supportive of rules to try and make sure we don't create some super intelligence, while at the same time now building his own foundation model company with XAI.
Yeah, the interesting thing, does Elon look for regulation when he's behind in an industry, and then, where he's ahead, he looks for deregulation? I think if you look at even things like SpaceX or Tesla, he's advocating for deregulation and potentially he would benefit from electric car subsidies being revoked, because he's so far ahead that other companies are more reliant on those subsidies. Similar for SpaceX, he's so far ahead that anything that allows him to launch more rockets faster is good for Elon. AI, not as clear, because if OpenAI and Anthropic and others just kind of go at the pace they're going, he's a little bit behind. Other AI related regulation, though, I guess would be something maybe we should discuss around wokeness of the AI or free speech.
Right. Clearly that's
open source,
of racial bias and stuff is not going to get regulated. I also think, Hollywood has a potential, strong copyright interest in AI. and they seem sort of out of the fold in a Trump administration. So you could have imagined a Harris administration sort of trying to do something to help protect copyright holders, and maybe that doesn't happen.
I also think it's interesting to your point on the wokeness of AI issue. Like, JD Vance kept bringing up this like censorship of social media as like a terrible crime of a Democratic administration, right? And obviously, I think we all know that the current top of the line AI models, GPT and Claude from Anthropic are there's a lot of quote unquote guardrails around what you can ask it, right? You can ask it, if you ask it to build like a pipe bomb or whatever, it's not going to tell you, right? And then there's a lot of other sort of, I don't know if you would categorize them as woke, but you'd say safety related sort of actions taken by those companies. And my question is like, is someone like JD Vance in the VP slot going to go crazy on these companies that are, regulating the speech of AI, quote unquote, and try to open up these models and make them a little wackier and maybe a little less safe when you talk to them?
Yeah, the weird part about all this is there is no regulation on this right now. It's all sort of internally regulated by the companies. OpenAI has a set of things they don't want ChatGPT saying to you, and it's true of XAI, of Grok. I believe when they launched their image model, you could ask for literally any copyrighted characters. You could ask for like Mickey Mouse holding assault rifles, or it
was a fun moment.
Celebrities, yeah. And I think Elon himself, also rolled that back, whether that's due to existing copyright law or their own internal desire to not have that be what users can make in their tool. It wasn't really some unique new AI regulation that had him do that.
Importantly, the Biden administration introduced an executive order that, in the words of the Andreessen Horowitz crew, regulated math, or tried to make math illegal. It's like, if you're doing a lot of math, if it's big enough, you need to register with the government, and we're going to keep track of it. And so that was mostly monitoring, but it certainly was a sign that, okay, government is going to be much faster this time around than with social media to sort of police the development of AI. So there's a big question of, does the Trump administration pick up the ball and say, oh, that was a good idea, we should keep doing stuff there? Or do they say, oh no, like our tech people, they don't really like that? And I think part of what we're sort of dancing around with Elon is like, some of the tech people, Mark Andreessen, Ben Horowitz, they endorse Trump. They don't want AI regulation. But then you've got Elon, who seems to be very worried about it. So it's not clear that there's actually a Silicon Valley Trump supporter consensus. And so therefore, we don't know exactly what Trump is gonna believe in terms of how much the either executive orders or pushing legislation needs to come along in AI.
I think this issue is going to come up around like job losses and job replacement at some point. Like all like half of American politics, it's all about jobs in the end. And I think that if and when we get to the point where there's meaningful job losses among a certain sector of workers, some party is going to step in and be the anti-AI party for that aggrieved group of workers. If we get self-driving trucks, pretty soon, and the 1.2 million truck drivers are losing their jobs, like, that's probably a Republican anti-AI group, right? Like, F the AI that is driving our cars. Like, we need a regulation that mandates, like, there's always a human behind the wheel or something. And then on the other side, like for, Democrats, if it turns out it's a bunch of like college educated, like middle management, white collar workers, who, legal associates or something, who are all getting replaced, and there's like massive job losses in those markets, I feel like the Democrats might step up and start being the anti-AI party, or the white collar job party to protect against AI. So my prediction is that at some point in the next 4 years, there's going to be a meaningful anti-AI backlash built around some sort of job losses. And I think it's really about what job losses come quicker, or what group of employees starts being more and more nervous about getting replaced by AI. Because if you look at the public polling, people are pretty nervous about AI already, and I think that's just going to keep escalating on a monthly, quarterly, yearly basis.
Couldn't be more opposed to that, but I agree with you that both parties seem likely to take up the mantle. I mean, I guess
it's going to be a popular viewpoint. Like they took our jobs. I'm sympathetic to the worker. Joke, right?
You know, like America's version of like a safety net is like you should be able to get a job, and so if we're not going to give much stronger social benefits to people, then we're going to have to sort of take a heavy-handed approach to making sure that they can get jobs. I would much prefer to say, as we attack jobs and find efficiencies, give people more healthcare coverage and safety net benefits than these sort of backwards looking job protections.
I guess maybe a counter take to that would be that one of the main lessons of the last election was that people seem to hate inflation a lot more than they hate unemployment. So maybe if AI is somewhat deflationary, in terms of
your eggs can be cheaper, all right?
Yeah, productivity going up. There's robots. There's robots
farmers now
picking those eggs. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe then it'll be hard to justify some of those regulations if you're seeing the benefits of a bit of the cooling of inflation.
I really disagree with the idea that people hate inflation more than they hate unemployment. I think it's all about the order of magnitude of both of these things, right? Again, people dislike 9% on inflation much more than they dislike 4 to 5% unemployment. But if you go back to the Great Financial Crisis in 2008, unemployment's the reason George Bush and John McCain got completely incinerated in that election, right? It wasn't inflation. It was job losses and the economy crashing and everything. So I just don't. I think that if 5% of American workers lose their jobs due to AI in the next 4 years or something, or 10, it's people are going to hate that. That would be my prediction. If there were a prediction market for that, I would throw some Dogecoin on it.
I think one of the key reasons we all oppose Trump, among many, is just he's a chaos agent. Who knows what's going to happen? America is actually great right now. Why blow up the status quo? In some ways, obviously, we could make continued incremental improvements, but just chaos is not necessarily a good thing. But yeah, so I think predicting what's going to happen in the Trump administration without considering sort of insane things going to happen makes him seem sort of more normal than he is. We've already touched on Taiwan, and of course, if China invades Taiwan, that hurts semiconductors. Are there other scenarios you can imagine where having Trump as president and this continued improvement of AI causes some weird problem or benefit?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should talk about what the world would look like under Trump if we achieve AGI in the next couple of years. Maybe that's an early time frame, but that seems like what Sam Altman is often.
Well, some of these people think AGI will solve democracy, so maybe we can get rid of Trump early. We plug it in the computer. It's
why do we need democracy? If
or
we have
just
AGI?
It's solves all these optimization. I'm joking. I honestly don't believe that. And Dario at Anthropic wrote a review of how he thinks AGI could move us forward, and I think he was also skeptical that democracy would be one. But
Sam Altman recently said on an interview that he expects us to kind of just blow by the AGI sort of goalpost, and then society not to change that much. Similar to maybe how we don't feel like society changed that much by passing the Turing test. So maybe it just is irrelevant, but it could be pretty interesting if that's not the case, and AGI totally upends society in some ways. Max already mentioned the kind of job loss scenarios. Is there anywhere else that we might see AGI completely change American society?
What about AGI, what about AI mayors and AI governors and sort of AI actually taking positions of power in our government, right? I mean, I think that there's some candidate I forget, in Texas or somewhere else, who said he's going to put every decision that he has to do as mayor through ChatGPT. Are we going to see that become a more meaningful part of the actual functioning of American government, that decisions are being filtered through AGI, or AI agents are carrying out administrative roles? I think that's plausible.
Possible. One thing I think I would flag, though, is if Trump, whoever happens to be president, if there is this big inflection point in AI, while we fantasize about downsides, could actually be beloved. It's if all of a sudden we're making way more progress on healthcare without spending government money, all of a sudden we have, these improvements, things are going great. There's a world which especially if his message is like, I'm going to let capitalism run wild and capitalism delivers AGI and AGI actually is good for people. The president, sort of gets to benefit from whatever is happening. And, if there are huge improvements in the next couple of years, it could just sort of boost people's impression of a Trump presidency.
I do think that's possible. I could see maybe, Max, what you're saying. There have been people who have tried to, I think, use ChatGPT as their defense attorneys. At some point, does ChatGPT just become better than your average government-provided attorney? Maybe then it starts to be an interesting legal question of whether you're allowed to do that or not. It's hard to say whether Trump would be supportive of any of this.
All right, so a quick look back. I think energy, we think, Trump could be good for creating the energy production we need for AI, though, of course, could have any sort of terrible impact on climate change. Chip production, I think the risk that he escalates tension with China and therefore hurts our ability to get chips from TSMC in Taiwan is probably a negative. He's also somewhat tariffs. He's somewhat opposed to the CHIPS Act, which is actually going well. And it seems like some of these plants are actually working. Regulation seems like he has competing points of view from his supporters. So it's unclear who he's going to listen to or how that plays out or whether they're sophisticated enough to do it. We didn't really dig into markets, but I think it's clear that right now the stock market is bullish about Trump. If there's not a lot of M&A review, that there could be, if antitrust is loosened up, there could be a lot of acquisitions.
I think it's very good for M&A. Yeah.
Yeah. So good for M&A, which, I mean, it could be bad for development if you think a lot of startups is how we make improvements. But yeah. So I think it's.
I would add one final footnote, which would be the final Trump black swan is he refuses to leave office, and we have a constitutional crisis / downfall of American democracy scenario in 4 years, which I don't think there's a lot to say about that other than it would probably be quite bad for everything across the world, not just AI. But I think that's always the black swan you have to throw in there with Trump, because he's clearly shown an intolerance for being removed from the White House.
Great. Well, I agree with you 100%, to be clear. And I think generally the point is that you have to be alive in a functioning society to benefit from AI, and that if you are not, you won't. And so that is why I think many of us thought that was the number one issue of the markets and whether anybody can acquire anybody or not. Yeah.
All right. So now we're going to move on to our next segment here. A little game we like to call overrated, underrated, or properly rated. The goal of this podcast is to sort of assess where we are today in AI, how various companies are doing. And I think what's interesting, and what James and I have discovered as startup founders, is there's often quite a lot of data available to anyone who signs up for the right websites about how companies are actually doing. And for these companies, a lot of which we've talked about in the AI startup space, the key indicators of success tend to be either revenue or users and usage. And you can find this kind of data for both categories. You can find it for companies that sell to other businesses, which are more revenue focused, and consumer companies, which are more about usage and uptake. And so I thought it would be fun to kind of walk through about 10 top AI startups, talk through their actual data that we were able to collect from various sources, and then walk through if we think, given this data, if the company is overrated, underrated, or properly rated based on fundraising and hype and so on. And just to lay this out up front, we pulled the revenue data from The Information, which we believe to be a fairly reputable source with respect to company revenue.
Very reputable. But it's clearly a chart, right? So it's
okay.
And some of it's directional.
Very reputable.
Yeah.
And then the usage data is pulled from two sources. One is called SimilarWeb, which I would consider to be the best in class tracker of website usage for more website driven AI companies. And then data.ai is probably the best for app data. So iOS and Android app usage. Again, none of this stuff is perfect within, 5 or 10%. but it tends to be very good about order of magnitude. Is this a company with millions of users or tens of millions of users or thousands of users? And it also tends to be good directionally. Is this company growing, flat, or shrinking? Which I think is very valuable information.
Especially in AI world where companies will have raised at billion-dollar valuations a year ago, and now people just sort of move on from them. And the only reason you might know why is if you look at their growth charts and they're reversing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to pick 10. We're going to go through, debate overrated, underrated, properly rated. I will frame it up first with the big kahuna, OpenAI, i.e. ChatGPT. According to the information, OpenAI is currently making over $4 billion with a B in annualized revenue. And I was able to pull the data both on app usage and website usage for ChatGPT and OpenAI. OpenAI has over 25 million monthly users on its app in the United States and has over 284 million monthly users worldwide on its website. I think you could pretty safely say it probably has near 500 million monthly active users if you were to add in the global app data. US iOS, 25 million. Yeah. And I think most interesting is the growth curve. According to basically all third-party sources, OpenAI has grown almost 50% just in the last 3 months, meaning it's like 1.5x bigger than it was 3 months ago. That could be the back-to-school boom, as we've discussed in previous episodes. But it has also grown over 2x year on year in terms of usage, as in it has twice as many people using it as it did a year ago.
Crazy.
So,
huge growth.
Yeah. So overrated, underrated, properly rated. This is obviously the highest rated startup in the AI space, but I'm interested in your guys' take. James, interested in your take. Overrated, underrated, properly rated.
Okay, so $157 billion valuation. There's maybe some question marks around that valuation in terms of how investors get paid back and things like that. I would say probably properly rated. It does seem to be the technical leader in the foundation model space. The one thing that I found really interesting is their CFO said recently 75% of revenue comes from consumers, so mostly ChatGPT subscriptions. The reason I would say properly rated is it's a huge amount of revenue from consumer subscriptions, and very few companies have that level of consumer subscription model, business model. But I do think that what's interesting is that the core of the company doesn't seem to be much of a consumer company. They did hire Kevin Weil, so maybe there's some efforts internally to bring in kind of consumer entrepreneurs and operators. But I think, yeah, I'm a little nervous about whether they can actually capture the value of having this massively successful consumer product sort of accidentally inserted into a research lab.
I'm raring up and ready to go.
Go, baby.
I think it's overrated. I mean, I've written a whole column about how it is overvalued. You know, I think certainly the revenue growth, which is what, Max, you're focusing on, is astounding. And if you look at that growth and compare it to Google and Facebook, you're like, this valuation makes tons of sense. But, you know, it's burning like $5 billion this year. It's going to burn probably more next year. And all that money is being spent creating models that are getting commoditized. So I think that's a big challenge. But the thing I'll add, besides the piece you can go and read, is that I think it's also overrated in that people in Silicon Valley are excited about Perplexity and Anthropic and everything else. And there are lots of other sort of competitors that people don't know. And so the public massively rates OpenAI, ChatGPT. That's what they know. That's what they're using. And maybe that means that OpenAI runs away with it. But if you were just talking to the consumer, they absolutely overrate the quality of OpenAI relative to what's available on the market.
Yeah, 100%. I'm not going to weigh in too long, but the growth is freaking nuts. I think given that the models have not improved that much in the last year, we can all say 2x growth year on year and 50% quarter on quarter growth is absolutely monstrous. So to me, this kind of re-rated me to be in the more properly rated zone. If it's multiple at 35x revenue, like that's just crazy growth given the models haven't even gotten that much better. If we actually get a better model and you continue to see even faster growth than this, the valuation is completely justified. So I'm sort of fascinated to see if this growth curve continues. All right, moving on to our next one. We'll go with the classic pairing with OpenAI, Anthropic. makers of Claude.ai. Anthropic is making about 100 million in revenue, according to the information. It has almost 10 million monthly users on its website. Not super meaningful app usage, maybe 500,000 to 1 million. And it grew 20% last quarter in contrast to OpenAI's 50% growth in the last quarter. So less than half as fast growth of OpenAI. So this time I'll kick it off with you, Eric. Overrated, underrated, properly rated.
I'm going to say underrated. I think
interesting.
One thing that I think is interesting is just if Trump really loosens the M&A environment and Amazon is in a sort of dire position in the AI race, does Amazon acquire Anthropic? I think it becomes much more likely all of a sudden. And so I think it's the value of Anthropic is, the amazing technical staff. They keep recruiting defectors from OpenAI. Obviously, I believe in the power of revenue and money coming in, and OpenAI is dominating it. But in many ways, Anthropic has sort of the same thing. And if this is a great category, there's going to be more than one player, and they'll figure out how to get customers.
James?
I'll agree with Eric. Underrated. I think they have a diversified strategy. Most of their revenue is coming from not from consumers, right? So they have every reason to go after enterprise adoption, and starting with what everyone basically agrees upon in terms of the comparison to OpenAI, that their coding models are better. Maybe that will change, and who knows what OpenAI has internally, but they seem to be outperforming OpenAI in that very key market of developer adoption and coding capabilities. So I think underrated for that reason.
Max?
Yeah, I will quickly say, based on this data, I think super overrated.
Yeah, based on the data, we're just ignoring the data.
I mean, you guys can say whatever you want. The vibes, for the record, before I pulled this data, I would have been where you are, which is like Anthropic, the model's dope. Everybody loves it. Developers, it's like Silicon Valley darling. It's the cool, artsy version of OpenAI. Okay, guys. OpenAI is making 40 times as much money and has 25 times as many users as Anthropic, and is growing more than twice as fast right now. And they're currently valued at like a third as much. It's absolutely cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. It makes no fucking sense other than as an M&A play. So I think Anthropic's great. I love the model. But based on this data, Anthropic's valuation is absolutely ludicrous in comparison to OpenAI's. So I'll say super overrated. Let's keep going. Midjourney, the darling of the image generation universe. Now, I will caveat this with Midjourney is the one consumer company where data is kind of hard to come by because they kicked off on a Discord, meaning a huge quantity of their usage is on a Discord server.
And as far as we know, they haven't taken outside investment, right?
As far as we know, they haven't taken outside investment. I will give 3 pieces of data here. One is the annual revenue of Midjourney, according to the information, is $200 million. Or more, and growing. I was able to get data on their web usage of midjourney.com, which is 4 million monthly active users, and growth looks pretty flat on the website, as in not growing, not shrinking, not much either way, flat. So, James, Midjourney, overrated, underrated, properly rated?
I think overrated at this point. I think they were clearly pioneers in this image generation space, and they had a nice advantage. People probably, a lot of this revenue is recurring revenue from subscriptions that they probably acquired a while back. Like you said, maybe not so much growth recently. I think that the image generation model space has gotten more commoditized. There's really good other models out there, Flux image generation being one of them, that gets high ratings in terms of realism and accuracy. So just a commoditized space, and I'm not sure that the consumer revenue side is going to keep growing for Midjourney.
Eric?
I agree with everything James said, but I'm going to say underrated for the very reason that they just didn't take venture capital. It's all like house money. They're making They're
Cash
making money
baby.
and they're pocketing it. And then so like, even if they like aren't going to be a sort of grow story where they're going to be the next, public $100 billion company, it's still, they made a killing along the way. So I say kudos to them. Yeah, underrated.
Yeah, I think I see both sides of the debate. So I support both of your takes.
Well, then
Cash
you're properly rated. You're
properly rated. Yeah, I think properly rated. I think the lack of growth is dispiriting, but to Eric's point, it's an absolute ATM machine for the founders. So who cares, I guess. All right, moving on. Jasper, frequently ridden a hype roller coaster, been high, been low. You guys can weigh in on where it is in the middle right now. According to the information, making around 60 million in annualized revenue. It has 600,000 worldwide web views in the last month, according to SimilarWeb, and is basically flat on growth. 600,000, not 600 million.
Yeah, overrated. Next.
Overrated. All right, overrated. All right, James.
No, I'm saying like, does the company even matter anymore? It was like, we were fighting to get them at our March Cerebral Valley last year, and now I feel like I didn't hear anything about them.
Okay, James.
I guess I'm calibrating to what I thought was a company that was already, to Eric's point, sort of like sort of its time had passed. But I guess based on where I was coming into this podcast and the 60 million revenue figure, like I think that's maybe they're a little underrated, given nobody's really talking about them, but they have a pretty substantial revenue base. If it's almost like more than a half of Anthropic, I don't know, that's pretty interesting. Maybe that's outdated data or something from the information. I'm not sure how recently that 60 million was reported, but if it's kind of in that 60% of Anthropic, I would be a little bit longer Jasper than I was coming into this. All right. Yeah, I think flat growth is tough. I would only say properly rated because I think folks like Eric have already danced on their graves a few times. So properly rated is fairly negatively. Okay, let's do Suno, the music generation darling that lets you create cool online songs using generative AI. They are at 40 million in ARR. They are at around 12 million in worldwide web views, or web users, uniques over the last month. And I think most interestingly, according to SimilarWeb, they appear to be shrinking a little bit over the last 3 months. Again, we'll caveat that this data is from a third-party source, but I think we can safely say they're not growing and they might be shrinking in the last 3 months. James, yeah. I had some questions on this. So you mentioned their mobile app adoption that they launched that? Like, I'm wondering if some of the web traffic is kind of is cannibalized by the mobile app. Yeah. The mobile app's quite small in comparison to the website right now. So I don't think it's enough to offset the shrinkage, which looked like 15% quarter on quarter on SimilarWeb. But there's probably some cannibalization of the web app by the mobile app. But again, I just don't think it's enough to offset. The mobile app isn't growing super fast or something. It's growing fast, but it launched like 2 months ago. I mean, so basically doubled month on month from like 100K to 200K, so it's not like life-changing numbers here. Yeah.
What is it?
So, James, overrated, underrated, properly rated. Suno. I know you love Suno. Yeah, I love Suno. I love the product. I use it a lot. I think they have definitely the best music generation model that I've seen, and they're also like really shipping pretty fast. They shipped this pretty cool feature that allows you to take pictures and generate a soundtrack based on the picture. They have these cover features that are allowing you to kind of sing into however you sing a version of the lyrics that you want, and it'll kind of put a style onto that music, and you can actually save styles now that you're generating from music. So I just think they're a very good product company, and I would say the 40 million is very impressive ARR. So I'm going to say underrated. I think everyone knows there's going to be a bear case here of like the legal status of the company, but I could also see that being, taking 10 years to sort out or something, or leading to some sort of like Spotify acquisition. So I don't know. I'm pretty bullish on them, and I would say underrated. Eric.
I'd say properly rated. I mean, they were extremely buzzy at Cerebral Valley, New York. Their CEO spoke. So definitely I am saturated with the hype. And I have churned. I didn't find sort of continued use as sort of it's fun to like whip it up and like show somebody, hey, I made a song about this thing. But I am impressed. I mean, they're like second on our list in terms of engagement, right? I mean, they're ahead of everything but OpenAI.
Yeah,
I mean,
they are.
People are using it, and
people
like,
are using it. Yes,
it's like a clear new use case. Like so much of, AI is like dreaming up use cases or over extrapolating from ChatGPT, and here is an actual generative product that people are using. So properly rated.
Yeah, and I think we've talked a lot about like, how long it's going to take to make Hollywood level movies with AI or even like novels, right? None of that's happened, but like music, we're basically there. Like the quality of Suno is, I think 90% or 95% of, the average pop song or something. So I mean,
it's pretty high.
Yeah, maybe that's a little high, but at least like I definitely think you could just like take you'd have to like work at it and make some songs that
Hollywood is going to come for them. I don't know. These things are all plagiarism machines, but
I think if you played songs like from someone who just woke up from a coma of the last pop songs of the last year and Suno songs, like you might see some interesting data. No.
I think it's like self-driving cars. It's like you need to get to 100%. Like 90% is like an uncanny valley where you're like, it sounds like a good song. Like,
I'm gonna go like overrated as a consumer product and maybe underrated as like a B2B product or some sort of like API, because I think that shrinking at this stage as a consumer company is really, really bad. I think that like just whatever whatever spin you want to put on it of how cool the thing is, I just think shrinking is quite bad, or being flat at 11 million. Even given the level of engagement, Eric.
They are a subscription business, right? So I don't think their revenue is shrinking.
Yeah, no, I don't think it is, but I just mean the usage. Like, if we think it's a consumer product, like tons and tons of people are going to create songs like for fun, and that's going to be.
I think that's how they see themselves. I don't think they see themselves as an API company.
But I agree. I don't think that's how they see themselves. But I think like the idea of creating music is very valuable to a million different creative professions. And I think that like gaming that we work in, I think having generated music is incredibly valuable, and maybe it's an input to actual pop songs and so on and so forth. So I just think that the model is insane. I think the revenue is good. To your point, I'm pretty worried about the shrinking consumer size.
Well, I love it as an artist tool where it's like pay for performance, and Suno gets all its money for like we're one of 3 authors on this song, and we get the royalties as
the publisher royalties. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to one of my favorites, Perplexity, the search engine that's going to destroy Google, according to Eric. Perplexity, 20 million ARR, according to the information. I thought there was recent reporting that put it more in the 30s. It might be more in the 30s now. MAU of their iOS app in the US. I can pull the global MAU, but I find that iOS US users to be the most valuable for this kind of product. Is 900,000 app users, under 1 million, and growth quite good, 2x in the last 8 months. I am also able to pull downloads data from data.ai, and downloads are roughly flat over the last 8 to 9 months. So kind of an interesting mix of growth narratives there. So
just a clarification there.
Yes.
The Wall Street Journal reported recently that their revenue went to 50 million. So
so that's much higher than the information reporting. So up to 50 million in revenue. So if that changes your perception, that's good upfront information. So James, Perplexity, overrated, underrated, properly rated.
I'm gonna go, even despite the fast growth in revenue here, I'm gonna go overrated. Given that they're reportedly trying to raise at I think an $8 billion valuation. I think it's like one of the hypiest companies in Silicon Valley right now. And what's interesting is that they have a ton of competition, including OpenAI, which just released this search GPT product. I mean, who knows if any of these can compete with Google on search? But yeah, it seems like it seems like A, Google is going to compete, and B, like OpenAI is going to compete aggressively in this space. And Perplexity doesn't seem to have like a ton of sustainable technical advantages or like a super large subscription base currently of consumers, or and also has a lot of potential risks on the copyright and legal side as well. So I'm saying overrated.
Eric?
It's overrated. I mean, it's just so hyped. It's so hyped. And like, I do think, Google pays a bunch of money to be in search bars. And like, I do think a lot of the search competition is just like being where people go to search. And there's going to be a heavy lift winning on quality. But maybe they strike good partnerships or something.
Yeah, I think overrated as well. I just think that the $8 billion valuation that they're supposedly raising at, I mean, like, for context, like I think their total MAU globally across iOS and Android is maybe like 8 million or something like that, and they're worth 8 billion, right? Reddit is currently worth about $20 billion, so we'll say like 2.5x as much right now on the open public markets. And Reddit has about 1.2 billion monthly active users, so they're currently being valued at about.
And I'm sure they're much more engaged too.
Yeah, about 40% as much as Reddit, with like 1/1000th the number of users, or sorry, 1/100th the number of users, like 1/100th or 150th of the users.
I think the only justification is the $10 to $50 million ARR growth between March and today, basically.
Yeah, I think the ARR growth is killer, but I just don't think the usage is that killer. Okay, I think that's enough companies. A lot of good takes in there. We'll save some more for the future. I think it would be great to get a wrap up, and given your guys' perception of these companies and the data we've seen so far, what do we think this tells us about the AI industry? What's valuable? Is it revenue? Is it usage? Is it growth? Is it a certain type of company? Do you have a more nuanced viewpoint? I'm fascinated to hear. So, Eric, you want to kick it off?
I mean, I think it's notable that, and not surprising, but notable that, some companies have peaked already, and that there are a lot of mini hype cycles. I would say, like these companies are making money when they're hypey because they're subscription businesses in some cases. And so I think that is good for them. But yeah, the fact that there are sort of mini hype cycles is notable.
I think what's really interesting is that the majority of the revenue we discussed coming from consumer applications, right? And that includes OpenAI, includes Midjourney, includes Perplexity, includes maybe.
For the record, there are a lot of B2B companies making plenty of money. So this is just where we have more interesting engagement data. But yes.
But I do think that a lot of it is with consumer.
Yeah, that's my take as well. And I think it's sort of interesting if you think back to the internet era, like a lot of the companies that kind of emerged first and became the biggest companies were those consumer companies. And then you had this later wave of like SaaS companies, right? Like kind of copying a lot of like the consumer internet mechanics and graphical interfaces and sort of adoption patterns. But I think maybe we're seeing something similar, that consumer kind of leads the way, and then you get later companies kind of adopting that technology in B2B.
Yeah, I think I have a similar perspective to you guys, which is that this seems like the greatest consumer revenue like boom time I've ever seen. I mean, I've never seen people sell stuff for money to consumers in the internet, post-internet era, right? I mean, the whole idea of the internet was like, everything's free, give it away for free, just get as many users as possible, like sell ads later, Google and Facebook and Snapchat and et cetera, et cetera. But like every single one of these companies is monetizing like very effectively.
They're making revenue. The one thing we haven't been talking about is they're giving people a service that might cost, that might be more expensive to produce than it is.
You're saying unit economics might be the issue here. Yeah.
Upside down. Yeah.
I think that's fair, but I sort of, I don't know. I doubt that these things are deeply out underwater on unit economics. I think OpenAI can afford to sort of incinerate money and probably Anthropic. But to your point, I think Midjourney, our understanding, is a super profitable. My bet would be that a number of these other, companies are unit economically doing quite well, whether it's like Suno or Perplexity or, any of these other ones. So I think that, it just feels like monetizing consumer products is like the narrative of the last year. And it'll be interesting to see if that continues.
All right, that's our show. Thanks for listening. Thanks, Max, for putting all that data together. Sure. Cerebral Valley is November 20th. We will have talks from Dario at Anthropic. Yeah, you'll get to hear on our YouTube channel and in this podcast feed from some of the people we're talking about here. And thanks so much for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks.